Good morning and welcome to the Insight AppSAD webinar series. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians on the land on which this event takes place and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'm coming to you today from Meanjin on the lands of the Turrbal and Niagara people. I would also like to extend that acknowledgement to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are joining us today across the web. My name is Sam Clark and I'm a nurse educator here at Insight, and I have the pleasure of facilitating today's webinar, Social Substances, the Online Landscape of Substance Use. Our presenters today are Carmen Lim and Brienna Rutherford. Carmen is a biostatistician and a Ph.D. candidate with the University of Queensland School of Psychology and National Centre for Youth Substance Use Research. Her current research examines the impact of cannabis legislation on emerging products and route of administration. Brienna is a current PhD candidate with the University of Queensland School of Psychology and National Centre for Youth Substance Use Research. Her research investigates the role of social media in adolescent substance use, behaviours and attitudes. We'll have time for questions following Carmen and Brienna's presentation, so please type any questions you may have for them in the chat and I will ask them on your behalf at the end. Welcome Carmen and Brienna. Over to you.
All right. Thank you, Sam. Thank you all for coming along. So my name is Carmen Lim, and together with my colleague Brienna Rutherford, we'll be talking about the online landscape of substance use. So all this will be drawing findings from our PhD research conducted here at the National Centre for Youth Substance Use Research. So before I proceed with today's talk, we would like to acknowledge that we are both presenting from the lands of Turrbal and Niagara people. We pay our respects to the ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to the country. We also recognize their valuable contributions to Australia and the global society. So, social media. What do we know about social media? So, social media platforms have revolutionized the way we communicate, share, and gather information. They have become increasingly popular with young people, with many of them spending an average up to 8 hours online per day. And platforms such as Snapchat, Instagram, and TikTok, these are the three main platforms that dominated the social media landscape, especially among young people. So in the USA, for example, more than 50% of 18 to 29 years old reporting daily use on their respective platforms. So more concerningly, when it comes to the social media newcomer TikTok, the number of daily US users aged 14 years or younger is reported to be a staggering of 18 million. So this is just 2 million less than the daily US users who are older than 14 years. And this proportion of youth TikTok users is also echoed in Germany, UK, and France, where between 40 to 45% of daily users are below the age of 14. So what about in Australia? In our country, around 21.3 million, or 81% of our population, are currently active on social media. The average monthly consumption reported by Australians was around 5.5 to 29.5 hours. But of all the social media platforms, TikTok is definitely the one to watch out for, as it saw the most significant rise in usage, especially in the past year. The reasons for use of social media among young people are quite often multifaceted, with the most obvious one being to connect with their peers. However, many young people also report using social media to access informative and educational content, as well as inspiration in regards to a variety of topics like substance use. And the high degree of trust many young social media users have in this channel is a cause for concern, because these platforms, they do have the capacity to influence societal norms, attitudes, behaviors in regards to substance use, all on a grand scale. But what exactly is online out there? Well, that very much depends on what you're interested in. So take cannabis, for example. We know that there are now more movements towards cannabis legalization. So my team and I at NISA, we have examined the shifting landscape of cannabis use on various social media platforms because we have seen a rise in the content that normalize cannabis use using popular culture and the type of posts that shifted cannabis stereotypes. So what did we find? So as part of my PhD, I'm especially interested in cannabis vaping. The reason being is that although smoking is still the dominant method to consume cannabis, vaping has surged in popularity, not just in the context of nicotine consumption, but also for cannabis. And many people also believe that vaping could be a safer mode of delivering cannabis than smoking because it's associated with fewer toxic byproducts of combustion. And additionally, there's also anecdotal reports that suggest that vaping could also facilitate a more rapid delivery of the psychoactive ingredients like THC into the bloodstream than smoking, which could then increase a person's risk of developing cannabis dependence. So with a click away, one can actually access many cannabis-related videos. For example, this one on the right, how to make weed oil without blowing up your home. This video immediately caught my attention as a young person. So I couldn't help but to think if there are more videos like that, and can anyone watch it without any restrictions? So in 2021, I have examined how cannabis vaping was portrayed on YouTube. And if you're interested to know more, you can find a study on addiction. But to summarize, for this study, my team and I, we have collected and watched in excess of 200 YouTube videos that are related to cannabis vaping. And as per what you would expect, there are lots of videos that are related to product recommendations, advertisement. There are also a couple of weird ones like this one on the top left, how to vape with your wisdom tooth removed. So I must admit that while some videos are hilarious, some could be quite intense as well, like this one here. So I'm keen to show our audience today this particular video that portrays risky behaviors. And apologies in advance for all the swears if you can hear them, but I just think that he's a bit high here.
This blueberry tastes so fucking good. I honestly think he charged me for 10. I'm not gonna lie, because it was over $600 the total. So fat fucking video right here, boys. I'm gonna just
Yeah, so we have got Nate, a cannabis influencer here, trying to attempt a weight challenge. So he's trying to show his audience how to vape 10 cartridges in 24 hours. He basically live streamed his experience like for a few hours. So bear in mind that a normal human would take a day or two to consume a vape, let alone 10. And do have a look at what his fans wrote to him as well. Like for example, this one from Terrence Johansson. Love you, Nate, emoji. Keep making videos like that. Then we also have Swan Song. You're the Bob Ross of weed channels. Love you, man. Keep doing what you're doing, I assume. Then we also have Christopher Hess. Bro, I love your videos. You have really inspired me. Thank you so much. So all these comments are obviously very concerning because it actually go on and encourage content creators to create more videos like that. So what did we find in the study? So we found that these 200 videos can be broadly summarized into 6 different categories. We found that videos that portray cannabis vaping as entertaining or humorous, these are the type of videos that accounted for majority of the views. This was followed by some DIY videos that reflect the user's experience, product review, advertisement, and lastly, videos that warn people against the use of cannabis. These were the least viewed videos. And collectively, all these videos were viewed more than 50 million times. And not surprisingly, they portrayed cannabis vaping quite positively. and more than half were not age restricted. So besides YouTube, we have also examined cannabis-related content on TikTok. With over 1 billion active monthly users, TikTok's convenient-to-use platform makes it the platform choice for many adolescents. So this study was led by my colleague Brienna, and it was published in Drug and Alcohol Review, if you're interested to access them. So what did we find on TikTok? Our results reveal that videos that depict that cannabis use as humorous, or those that promote the lifestyle acceptability, or those that discuss personal use experiences were the most common ones. Not surprisingly, videos that warn users against the risk of using cannabis only accounted for about 3% of the total sample. And some of those videos were highly popular, recording high views, over 760 million views from TikTok users. How was it depicted on TikTok? Well, the majority of these videos contain pro-use messaging, with only 4.5% expressing negative sentiments in regards to cannabis use. So who made these videos? Well, content creators were predominantly male Caucasians between the ages of 25 to 50 years old, and 19.9% of these creators, they had their cannabis-specific channels, so they basically sell cannabis products. And these videos also typically involve primary presenters smoking 50% of the time, and around 30% of the time they were vaping in the videos, and around 14% of the time they will be like consuming edibles, in the video. So we have also collected information on the perceived benefits of using cannabis. The claimed benefits, they range from improved perceptions of general well-being, better pro-social skills. They also use it to relieve physical and mental ailments, and also to improve personal attributes. So social media can be an incredibly useful tool to gauge public opinion on emerging substances too, like delta-8 THC. But when most people think about cannabis, they quite often associate it with delta-9 THC. And THC is the primary psychoactive compound that produces the high that many people were after. So now I'm going to turn your attention to delta-8, an emerging minor cannabinoid that has surged in popularity since 2021. So delta-8 THC is a chemical analog of delta-9 THC, but it only has the 75% of the potency of delta-9. So to keep the long story short, what happened was that the US Congress, they passed the 2018 Farm Bill that essentially removed hemp from the Controlled Substances Act. So although the Farm Bill only exempted delta-9 THC, some parties have taken this to mean that other extracts from industrial hemp were effectively legalized, including delta-8. So this interpretation has driven a surge in the popularity of delta-8 production all across the USA. So my team and I are currently examining how delta-8 is being marketed on Twitter. So we have examined in excess of 120,000 tweets. So this is a word cloud showing you what was being discussed on Twitter, or X, by the legal status of cannabis in the USA. Not surprisingly, you'll find a lot of marketing-related words like shipping, products, gummies, etc. So you can find all these marketing words even in jurisdiction where cannabis for non-medical use is not yet legal. So while regulators are still thinking about how to regulate cannabis and delta-8 THC, the cannabis industry, unfortunately, have also managed to isolate delta-10 THC. This is a new cannabinoid which is claimed to be less potent than delta-8 and delta-9. But 2 weeks ago, I also saw an article in the High Times about a newer cannabinoid, THC-JD. So the article basically encouraged more people to check out this new product because it's claimed to be more potent than Delta-8 and Delta-9. So are both products legal? They are, because under the federal law, it complies with the 2018 Farm Bill. But why is it legal? Well, law often lags behind the rapid development of technological advancement. So if this doesn't worry you yet, you should be, because most people can legitimately see and access these products on social media, including young people. So cannabis content is clearly thriving on social media platforms. What about for other classes of substances like tobacco and alcohol? In 2022, our center, we conducted a systematic review to assess a variety of substances type and how they were depicted on social media platforms. We synthesized 73 studies to generate a holistic understanding of substance-related imagery on social media platforms. So if you haven't already, you got to check out this giant review, which is now published on addiction. So we have included a total of 73 studies which identified close to 16 million substance-related social media posts across Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Pinterest, and Weibo. These studies have covered a range of substances like tobacco, e-cigarette, alcohol, cannabis, and opiates. And the content of the 16 million posts could be broadly summarized into 22 different categories, with the most common one being in relation to health, safety, and harms, promotion or marketing related, or informative and educational related. But in regards to the educational ones, these are the content that discuss the health impacts, safety of use, advertised use, or the type of content that provided viewers with information in regards to the substance. When looking at substance-related content overall, we found that the sentiments were predominantly positive for all the substance category, with the exception of opiate use, for which the sentiment was negative. So despite jurisdictional variance in the legality of various substances, our research has also shown a high prevalence of advertising or promotional content which provide viewers to access to substances, both on social media and on other online platforms as well, like crypto markets. So no doubt the social media marketing landscape historically has been relatively unregulated compared to other forms of marketing. This has resulted in an increase in substance-related advertisement on platforms popular among young people. To test this, in 2023, which is this year, we recruited 125 Australian university students to determine the thematic makeup of alcohol-related advertisement on Facebook and Instagram. And our results indicated that an alcohol-related advertisement can be seen every 60 seconds on average. And most of the advertisement on both Facebook and Instagram, they also included a link to instant purchasing. And advertisement also typically use messaging features, which reflected the ease of access to encourage viewers to purchase alcohol. But the purchase of substances online is not just limited to ClearNet. So this is the regular searchable internet that most people are familiar with. There's also the dark net or dark web, which is part of internet that isn't indexed by traditional search engines. The dark net, they host a number of anonymous marketplaces where various items like illegal substances can be purchased. And these marketplaces also uses cryptocurrencies like Bitcoins for transactions due to their pseudo-anonymous nature. And in 2021 alone, the GDS survey, they reported around 11%, 11% of the respondents reported purchasing drugs off crypto markets. And this is how a drug listing looks like on the darknet. So this is a vaping related listing, and you can see that it very much resembles other legal online marketplaces like Amazon and eBay. So each product will contain like the titles, the price, and the vendors along with the feedback. And when you click onto the listing, you can see like a brief description of the products and the shipping destination, etc. So my team and I have examined 3 darknet markets that vary in sizes. We were especially interested to see what are the type of substances that could be vaped. This research was undertaken in the late 2019, around the time when the Ebola outbreak took place. What we found was 80% of these substances marketed for use in vaping devices were cannabis oil containing THC. This also aligns with the CDC report where a lot of the Ebola patients were reporting vaping THC oil that was adulterated with vitamin E acetate. And we also found that majority of the products could be shipped worldwide, including to Australia, which could also imply that the product is high in supply and is accessible online. With that said, I'm now going to head over to my colleague Brienna, who is going to talk about content creators and the consequences from being exposed to online content. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Carmen. So as Carmen said, having identified the thematic makeup, prevalence, and accessibility of substance-related content on social media, we wanted to identify the source of this content. So who specifically was out there generating substance-related material on the various social media platforms. In 2022, we conducted a systematic review to explore what categories of users were posting about substances online. Making up the minority of substance-related content creators was public health organisations. As would be expected, these accounts primarily shared content that was thematically informative or related to the health, safety, and harms associated with various substances. Social media provides incredible opportunities for audience reach and engagement, so we're certainly starting to see more public health organisations take advantage of this forum to balance the narrative regarding substances online. The majority of content relating to substances was posted by individual users. The category of users typically took to social media to share their own personal experiences with using substances, both illicit and otherwise. They shared tips, tricks, and reviews of products with one another, or promoted the lifestyle accessibility of substance use. Commercial accounts were also a prominent source of pro-substance use messaging, predominantly through advertising and marketing campaigns, which aim to build brand awareness or provide access to storefronts through Shop Now links or online storefronts. It's important to note that the substances were illicit in nature, and we did not encounter any commercial entities which promoted any illegal substances. In continuing our exploration of substance use content online, we next wanted to determine whether the public availability of this content did in fact have any impact on youth substance use and behaviours. Now, that's a rather broad question, so we did narrow the focus to tobacco and e-cigarette products only. The use of vapes by Australian youths and the population generally has become a significant public health issue and resulted in various regulative changes. The most recent of these sought to reduce the amount and concentration of nicotine contained within vapes, restrict the flavours, colours, or other ingredients within them, and prohibit the importation of non-prescription vapes. To address this question, our team sourced 32 studies focusing on tobacco and e-cigarette use and attitudes in youth across the globe. You can check that out using the QR code in the corner there. To expand on previous literature, which investigated the links between tobacco use and tobacco exposure on social media, we wanted to distinguish between exposure to and actual engagement with both vaping and tobacco-related content online, as well as exploring various attitude-related outcomes, including susceptibility and risk perceptions, in addition to actual use behaviours. So for the purposes of this study, we defined exposure to social media content as viewing peer posts, advertisements, or other user-generated content, whereas engagement referred to the actual act of liking, commenting, sharing, searching for, or posting content regarding substances. So what did we find? We started with e-cigarette engagement and its association with e-cigarette use. Narrative synthesis identified that in US youth between 13 and 14 years who reported lifetime engagement, they were more likely to report both current and ever e-cigarette use. We were able to conduct a meta-analysis to determine that there was a positive relationship between 30-day e-cigarette exposure on social media and 30-day use of e-cigarettes in both US youths aged 12 to 17 and Chinese youths aged 13 to 18. These findings were mirrored where participants reported e-cigarette exposure on social media, with US youth reporting lifetime exposure on Facebook, significantly more likely to report current use. It's important to also note that non-significant associations were identified on other platforms like Twitter and YouTube. Young adults were also more likely to report past year use if they had been exposed to e-cigarette content in the past year on social media. However, in contrast to this, a sample of Chinese youth did not find similar findings, and the authors actually decided that their results were inconclusive to determine whether exposure was related to e-cigarette use. Moving on to engagement with tobacco content on social media, US youths who reported past year engagement had greater odds of current use, and those who reported lifetime engagement were also more likely to be current users of tobacco products. A further sample of US youth also found that increased engagement was correlated with increased frequency of tobacco use, progression to polysubstance use, and a lower incidence of being able to cease tobacco use. We were able to conduct a meta-analysis on engagement with tobacco content on social media and tobacco use behaviours, and this found a significant positive relationship between past year engagement and past year tobacco use. Similarly, with exposure, narrative synthesis revealed that 30-day and 6-month exposure to tobacco social media content was positively associated with current use, and similar associations were identified for past year exposure and past year use. Lifetime exposure was also a significant predictor of current tobacco use, and current users who were exposed to tobacco social media content were more likely to purchase tobacco and less confident in their ability to cease use of tobacco products. In regard to our other attitude-related outcome variables, we found that US youth who reported past 30-day exposure to e-cigarette related content were more likely to have positive attitudes towards the use of e-cigarettes. Exposure on Instagram and Snapchat, which you will recall were highly used among youths, were significantly associated with positive attitudes to e-cigarettes as well. Facebook, however, which is not as popular among youths, was non-significantly associated with positive attitudes. Moving to susceptibility, Chinese youth who reported exposure were more susceptible to offers of e-cigarette products from peers, and US youths who reported past 30-day exposure had reduced risk perceptions, as did those who reported 6-month exposure to e-cigarette related content on social media. When looking at the influence of tobacco engagement on social media, we found that those who had ever used tobacco had a non-significant positive association between tobacco exposure and reduced risk perceptions. This was a significant result for those who had never used tobacco. Moving on to tobacco exposure and tobacco attitudes, narrative synthesis revealed that US youths who reported exposure were more likely to have more positive social attitudes towards tobacco use, and both never and ever tobacco users were more likely to believe that smokers had more friends. Similarly, never and ever tobacco users were also more likely to believe that smoking made users look cool. Now, this is where our results started to get a little bit murky. Narrative synthesis in regard to susceptibility for tobacco exposure to social media content found mixed results, with 12 to 17-year-olds exposed to branding of tobacco products only, and those exposed to branding and online tobacco advertisements, both significantly more susceptible to future use. This effect was not observed in the older sample of 18 to 24-year-olds, and inconclusive evidence was found for those who were experimental, current, or established smokers aged 12 to 17. There was a positive relationship between 30-day exposure to tobacco-related content and susceptibility among youth never users in that slightly expanded age bracket, but no conclusive evidence that ever users were more susceptible than those who were not exposed. Again, a slightly altered age bracket had contrasting findings. 6-month exposure among US adults and lifetime exposure among youths in Guam, aged 10 to 14, were also positively associated with increased susceptibility. Now, I know that was quite dense. There was a lot to go through there, but to summarize our meta-analyzed findings, we found significant associations between tobacco content engagement on social media and tobacco use, exposure to tobacco content on social media and lower risk perceptions among never users, and exposure to e-cigarette content on social media and e-cigarette use. We did not observe a relationship between exposure to tobacco content on social media and risk perceptions among the ever users. For our narrative synthesis, we found a few more significant associations between tobacco content exposure and increased current use and pro-tobacco attitudes, e-cigarette content exposure and increased susceptibility and lower risk perceptions, tobacco content engagement and increased susceptibility, e-cigarette content engagement and increased use, dual exposure and increased susceptibility. So that was papers where they were exposed to both tobacco and vaping content simultaneously rather than one or the other. Similarly for dual engagement and increased dual use, so use of both products. Mixed findings were found for associations between e-cigarette content exposure on attitudes towards e-cigarette use, tobacco content exposure on susceptibility to tobacco use, dual exposure on dual use behaviours, and dual engagement on dual susceptibility. Our colleague Brendan Cheng has also found similar associations between social media engagement and alcohol behaviours among youth and young adults. You can check his paper out here using the QR code on your screens, but in essence, this study found that greater exposure to alcohol-related content on social networking sites was related to alcohol-related outcomes, including self-posting of alcohol use among youths and greater alcohol consumption. So how do we address this potential relationship? At present, social media content regulation is largely administered by the social media companies themselves. Typically, this is done through an automated moderation system and reporting tools for users to flag concerning content. Age restrictions have also been enforced to prevent users under the age of 13 from creating their own content. However, this restriction does not prevent them from possibly being exposed to high risk or concerning content, such as substance-related imagery. In 2022, again, we sought to review the changes in viewer engagement before and after the US congressional hearing on youth protection measures on social media. Specifically, we wanted to examine how many videos from a previously collected sample of popular vaping videos remained accessible after the congressional hearing. In doing so, we sought to determine whether the restrictions implemented in response to the congressional hearing had actively made an impact in the availability of this e-cigarette related material on social media, in this instance on the TikTok platform specifically. In response to the congressional hearing, TikTok elected to remove a number of explicit substance-related hashtags from the platform's search feature. For those of you who aren't familiar with TikTok and hashtags, these can be used by content creators to categorize their content and find other users interested in the same topics. The removal of these hashtags was not an exhaustive measure, as you can see on the screen now. Despite removing the hashtag cannabis, colloquialisms for cannabis still remain active, such as hashtag weed. And you can also see from the little videos included in that screenshot that they are mostly related to cannabis. Our sample of vaping videos was also largely unaffected by the removal of explicit substance-related hashtags, with a total of 3 hashtags of the 9 included in the sample being removed, and only one of those displays the community guidelines violation warning. So as you can see on the screen here, it really appears that e-cigarette related material is alive and well on TikTok. So after establishing that most of these hashtags remained online, we sought to determine whether we could still access the videos using the URLs we had obtained previously. So at 9-month follow-up after the US congressional hearing, we found that 562 of the 800 videos remained, and they had actually increased by 1.4% in views and 4.4% in likes. At 12-month follow-up, 512 videos still remained, and again, there was a 1.7% increase in views and 4.2% increase in likes when compared to baseline. In addition, the most viewed and most liked videos were still publicly available, which indicates that although TikTok may be removing a small proportion of content that promotes the use of e-cigarettes through their current regulation tools, the metadata of these remaining videos indicates an increase in viewer engagement. This increase in engagement is cause for concern, given that engagement with e-cigarette content has been associated with an increase in pro-use attitudes and behaviours among youth and young adults. To conclude our presentation today, we'd like to leave you with these key takeaways. The first of which is that there are various substances being publicly promoted and accessible to youth users of social media. Content promoting use of and access to substances is largely unregulated, which provides an opportunity for youth to obtain substances that they possibly shouldn't without understanding the risks appropriately. Content is predominantly generated by individual users. However, there are brilliant opportunities for public health messaging on these forums. And online content influences youth behaviours and attitudes around substance use, though there is still some, I suppose, opportunity for clarification as to the degree to which this online content has that influential relationship. Lastly, as to regulation, we note that the current models may not appropriately minimise the risk of online content, and further collaboration between social media companies, public health organisations and researchers is needed to identify an appropriate solution. And that brings us to the end of our presentation today. Thank you all for listening to us and bearing with us, and we'll open it back up to Sam for questions.
Thank you very much, Brienna and Carmen, for a very interesting presentation. We've had a few questions come through, so if we have a little bit of time, hopefully we can get through those. So one of the first one that came through was, would you expect to see similar emerging cannabinoids such as the Delta-8 and Delta-10 become widely available in Australia?
It very much depends on the current cannabis policy, I suppose. But we know that social media is borderless. What I can see though is what other people can see as well. But the current regulatory environment in Australia is a bit different from those ones that we observe in the USA. in the USA, the current cannabis law is a bit patchy. Federally, it's illegal, but there are now more and more states that beginning to move towards legalizing cannabis for non-medical use. And in those jurisdictions where cannabis is still illegal, there's definitely a rise in Delta 8 and Delta 10 products because it has been widely promoted because people can still use this product to get high, right? Yeah, and so the short answer is that will it become popular in Australia? It very much depends on the policy.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I suppose the next question, Brienna, you touched a little bit on this in your summary. It said, do Australian laws regarding tobacco advertising affect online ads?
That is a good question. So there's a bit of a, I suppose, difference between your online advertising that you might get when you're scrolling a Google search and you've got that little banner that pops up on the side in comparison to actual social media ads. It is really, it's not covered as well as it should be. You get away with a lot more on social media, given that it is such a global enterprise. And I believe there was some movement recently where they've actually allowed you to start advertising substances that you wouldn't see on traditional media, like your television, radio, newspaper, print media, that kind of thing.
I suppose there's a little bit of a follow-on question that's just come through that touches on that a little bit to say that, are there any studies which compare how youth respond to social media versus movies, TV?
An excellent question, actually.
Yeah.
We haven't done anything, although we might now if they don't get to it first. I know Carmen's just wrapped up a paper that looks at messaging in various campaigns for secondhand smoking, I believe, but that is looking more at the campaigns that are run on social media in a different way as comparing the two. But it would definitely be interesting to look at how they, I suppose, interpret the messages they receive, whether they take social media as a more accurate representation of substance use in comparison to a movie, which they know is not real, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. It does. I suppose stepping back to the regulation, there's a question to say, will regulation of e-cigarettes, like alcohol and tobacco, help to decrease the number of youth vaping?
Time will tell. Time will tell, I suppose. We can't really predict that one. I don't know that it will have an impact on the availability of content online, because obviously those regulations exist for tobacco and alcohol, and we're still seeing the same sort of concerning content, but it'll be interesting to see whether these more strict regulations actually do have an impact on the prevalence of use.
Just to add on a bit on that as well. As of yesterday, when I was scrolling like Facebook Marketplace, I saw a lot of like overt advertisement. So people are still advertising like vape pens for sale on Facebook Marketplaces. But the title of the listing is not immediately obvious that it was for vaping. Yeah.
So a little bit more hidden than in your face as it might have been at another point in time.
Yeah.
Another question we had that said that the promotion of e-cigarettes in the US was very much aimed at a young audience when the products initially came to market. Would you expect to see the same use of e-cigs in Australia as reported by US youth?
Well, given Australia has actually been quite proactive recently in changing their regulation to restrict the importation of it, hopefully the increase is not as, I suppose, prevalent as it is in the US. There probably will still be, and there still has been, an increase in use. I believe there was an article that was actually released yesterday in the ABC News about Queensland specifically and the rate of hospitalizations they've seen as a result of youths and children who have either willingly or unintentionally ingested e-cigarette vapes and ended up very, very unwell. So hopefully these regulations might sort of lessen the impact and prevalence. But again, that's something that time will tell.
Do you think that we've seen the same level of promotion in Australia as they maybe saw in the US, just given that a lot of the studies you referred to were based from the US?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I haven't specifically looked at Australian only content. That is something that is quite difficult to do in social media. We can always assume where it's come from based on, I suppose, the accent or the mannerism of the presenter, but we can't tell whether that user-generated content is Australian. We haven't seen a lot of Australia-specific commercial advertising of e-cigarettes on social media. But again, the nature of it is that it's global. Something that's generated in the US might still have the same effect in Australia just because it's accessible.
Yeah, just to add on as well, like e-cigarette advertising is not actually allowed in Australia. So yeah, they're not supposed to do that.
Yeah, I think by what you showed of the information on TikTok and other social media platforms that are popular with youth, it probably skims under the radar under a different hashtag.
Yes, yeah, that is the big issue.
Yeah, absolutely. There was one of your slides where you had some information about the where drugs were sourced from and some percentages. I saw that was from the Global Drug Survey, and there's a question that says, is the pattern in Australia similar to the global data on where people source their substances from?
I haven't looked at Australia in detail, but I'm pretty sure the Global Drug Survey has published some information on that. But from what I gather, the proportion of people sourcing drugs from crypto market has been relatively stable over the years. Yeah, and yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, so possibly quite similar, but the Global Drug Survey will probably give that in-depth detail for Australia.
That's right.
Yeah, lovely. Well, if there are no other questions, there is just one comment that says, brilliant presentation, Carmen and Brienna, first-class research, well done. So thank you again for providing us with this information. It's been very interesting to see the research and how you've pulled together the conclusions of what's going on online. So without further ado, please join us next Wednesday at 10 for a presentation on What About the Siblings and the Family in the Drug and Alcohol Sector by Julie Perrin. And don't forget to fill out our post-webinar survey, and we'd love to hear your feedback, and we will see you next week. And thanks again, Carmen and Brienna, for a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.